One night the young peasant, his spirit stung by the violent or luxurious language in which Stephen escaped from the cold silence of intellectual revolt, had called up before Stephen's mind a strange vision. The two were walking slowly towards Davin's rooms, through the dark, narrow streets of the poorer Jews. "A thing happened to myself, Stevie, last autumn, coming on winter, and I never told it to a living soul, and you are the first person now I ever told it to. I disremember if it was October or November. It was October, because it was before I came up here to join the matriculation class." Stephen had turned his smiling eyes towards his friend's face, flattered by his confidence and won over to sympathy by the speaker's simple accent. "I was away all that day from my own place over in Buttevant, I don't know if you know where that is, at a hurling match between the Crokes Old Boys and the Fearless Thurles. And by God, Stevie, but that was a hard fight. My first cousin, Fonzie Davin, was stripped to his buff that day, minding cool for the Limericks, but he was up with the forwards half the time and shouting like mad. I never will forget that day. One of the Crokes made a woeful wipe at him one time with his come on, and I declare to God he was within an aim's ace of getting it at the side of his temple. Oh, honest to God, if the Crook had caught him, that time he was done for." "I am glad he escaped," Stephen had said with a laugh. "But surely that's not the strange thing that happened to you." "Well, I suppose that doesn't interest you, but leastways there was such a noise after the match that I missed the train home, and I couldn't get any kind of a yoke to give me a lift, for, as luck would have it, there was a mass meeting that same day over in Castletown Roach, and all the cars in the country were there. So there was nothing for it only to stay the night or to foot it out. Well, I started out to walk, and on I went, and it was coming on night when I got to the Ballahowra Hills. And that's better than 10 miles from Kilmallock, and there's a long, lonely road after that. You wouldn't see the sign of a Christian house along the road or hear a sound. It was pitch dark almost. And once or twice I stopped by the way under a bush to redden my pipe, and only for the dew was thick I'd have stretched out there and slept. At last, after a bend in the road, I spied a little cottage with a light in the window, and I went up and knocked at the door. A voice asked who was there, and I answered I was over at the match in Buttevant, and was walking back, and that I'd be thankful for a glass of water. After a while, a young woman opened the door and brought me out a big mug of milk. She was half undressed, as if she was going to bed, when I knocked, and she had her hair hanging, and I thought by her figure and by something in the look of her eyes that she must be carrying a child. She kept me in talk a long while at the door, and I thought it strange because her breast and her shoulders were bare. She asked me was I tired and would I like to stop the night there. She said she was all alone in the house, and that her husband had gone off that morning to Queenstown with his sister to see her off. And all the time she was talking, Stevie, she had her eyes fixed on my face, and she stood so close to me that I could hear her breathing. And when I handed her back the mug at last, she took my hand to draw me in over the threshold and said, "Come in and stay the night here. You've no call to be frightened. There's no one in but ourselves." I didn't go in, Stevie. I thanked her and went on my way again, all in a fever. At the first bend of the road, I looked back, and she was standing at the door. The last words of Davin's story rang in his memory, and the figure of the woman in the story stood forth, reflected in other figures of the peasant women whom he had seen standing in the doorways at Clane as the college cars drove by, as a type of her race and of his own. A bat-like soul, waking to the consciousness of itself in darkness and secrecy and loneliness, and through the eyes and voice and gesture of a woman without guile, calling the stranger to her bed. A hand was laid on his arm, and a young voice cried, "Ah, gentlemen, your own girl, sir. In the first handsel today, gentlemen. Buy that lovely bunch. Will you, gentlemen?" The blue flowers which she lifted towards him, and her young blue eyes, seemed to him at that instant images of guilelessness, and he halted till the image had vanished, and he saw only her ragged dress, and the damp coarse hair, and the hoydenish face. "Do, gentlemen, and don't forget your own girl, sir." "I have no money," said Stephen. "Buy them lovely ones, will you, sir? Only a penny." "Did you hear what I said?" asked Stephen, bending towards her. "I told you I'd no money. I tell you again now." "Well, sure, you will some day, God, sir, please God," the girl answered after an instant. "Possibly," said Stephen, "but I don't think it likely." He left her quickly, fearing that her intimacy might turn to gibing and wishing to be out of the way before she offered her ware to another, a tourist from England or a student of Trinity. Grafton Street, along which he walked, prolonged that moment of discouraged poverty. In the roadway at the head of the street, a slab was set to the memory of Wolfe Tone, and he remembered having been present with his father at its laying. He remembered with bitterness that scene of tawdry tribute. There were 4 French delegates in a brake, and one, a plump, smiling young man, held, wedged on a stick, a card on which were printed the words "Vive l'Irlande."